Today's special guest is the New York Times best-selling author of his Rags to Riches book, Nothing to Lose and Everything to Gain. He's also just exited from the New York Stock Exchange worth $792.4 million. And currently he's the CEO of Altar's Call, which is a spiritual entrepreneurship movement. Please welcome Ryan Blair. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Great, Joshua. Thank you for having me, my man.
Hey, I know you have a pretty big schedule, so I'm going to try to be respectful for your time, just to kind of just jump in there, because a lot of my crowd that watch me they don't really pay much attention to business or anything like that. Could you kind of just give me a Reader's Digest of what you do and how you became who you are? I know it's going to be kind of a long monologue, but.
Yeah. Well, how I became who I am, I'm 45 years old, so I could take you back many, many years. But, I came up in a very traumatic household with a very violent father and an alcoholic mother and a drug-addicted father. And we were in the middle class. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a homemaker. My dad's from West Virginia. My mom's from California. So I've got a little bit of country in my background. And as a result of, our middle class environment being torn away from us when my father's addiction ran its course, we lost our home, lost our car, house was foreclosed on, car was repossessed. And so my early childhood was having the middle class ripped away from me. And I got to experience how fragile the middle class is and how bad life can be when you go from one side of the tracks to the other. So I went from middle class to poverty. My dad disappeared on us. My mom and I were left to fend for ourselves. I'm the youngest of seven, but all my other older brothers and sisters had already moved out by that time. And I got caught up in a gang, got caught up in all kinds of illegal entrepreneurship, basically, trying to figure out how to survive. My mom was making minimum wage, and I was eating minimum wage at that time. I'm a pretty big guy, so everything that she had coming in was just basically to feed me, and she did her very best that she could. And I then tried to find any way that I could to make money to be able to augment the lack of money that she made. So I got to experience poverty in a very difficult way. And then by the grace of God, and I'm very spiritual, and you'll hear that theme in our conversation here today. By the grace of God, my mom found me a mentor who was an entrepreneur. And I saw the way the wealthy people lived at that time. And I made a decision. I was like, everybody else doing this stuff, this job stuff, this middle class stuff, all of that, to me, I thought that was a bad strategy. I thought the best strategy is to build, a company and be an entrepreneur and to build something of value. And so I started in that pursuit when I was 19. And I've been doing it now since, 19 years old.
Oh, wow. You mentioned, and I read both your books, which were awesome. One, they were short enough to keep my attention span, but they were very direct and poignant. I've read a lot of business books and I made it big when I was poor books, and most of them are just filled with filler and not really attainable. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, but you didn't tell me how you did it. I saw a really strong connection with you and your stepdad. Mm-hmm. And as he was your mentor, he, taught you a lot of things that were valuable. And I hate thinking like this, but what do you think would happen if you didn't have a mentor? How important was it to you?
There's an old proverb: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yeah. And spiritually, what is meant for you is going to come your way no matter what. So I was ready as a student at that time. And if it wasn't Bob Hunt, it would have been somebody else. And it was more my reverence for what he was teaching me, because many people have, a successful person come into their life and they don't have any reverence for it. So they don't learn anything from it. And so, just because you get somebody with wisdom in front of you doesn't mean that you'll be, open to receiving it. So I was open, I was hungry. I was hungry for the information, and he gave me some information. And then he told me, you need to go back to school and get your GED. You need to start listening to some audiobooks because you have a terrible vocabulary. You need to listen to business vocabulary books because you don't know anything about business. And he told me all this stuff, and I said, okay. And I went and consumed it all. I would go to sleep at night listening to audio tapes. At the time, we had audio tapes. And I would literally wake up every time the tape ran its course and flip it in the middle of the night, because I wanted to subliminally and subconsciously program myself to this new way of thinking. Because I, was living in poverty, and the way I thought, I knew that my mindset was going to be a detriment to me. And so I was hungry. And so how would my life be if I'd never had a mentor? As I believe that God would have found me a suitable teacher one way or the other.
That's actually a brilliant answer. Not really what I was expecting, which takes me by surprise. Obviously. But so what I'm getting is that your actions and what you're wanting brought your mentor. That it wasn't like somebody just gifted you a mentor.
No. I resisted it. A mentor is going to get you out of your comfort zone. And I didn't like him. I thought, who's this rich guy trying to tell me, who's never lost anything in his life? He's never been in a fist fight. He's never been to juvenile hall. Who's this guy trying to tell me how to live life? That was my attitude when I showed up. Very guarded. And he just happened to have enough love in his heart to see through that garbage. And he introduced me to Tony Robbins and Napoleon Hill and Carnegie, Dale Carnegie. He introduced me not to them personally because he didn't know them. He just introduced me to their works. And as a result of that, then I, grew. But I would tell you there's been a pattern in my life, and there still is to this day, where I'm always looking for my next mentor. I'm not done. And I have a tremendous amount of reverence for them. I don't, I see it as a very spiritual thing that they're here to teach me, and I take it very seriously.
Excellent. You do mention faith a lot, and I respect that. And I don't judge anybody by their faith at all. I have a philosophy: as long as you're not hurting anybody, it's not my business what your faith is.
Yeah.
But I do respect that a lot. I live in the Bible Belt, and faith here is a little different than a lot of places I've noticed. You've got to say praise Jesus a lot when you say something, and it seems kind of fake to me. And that's, how important is faith in creating success to you, and why?
Well, it's a great question. And I too have a challenge with people that have never thought for themselves and try to tell me how to think.
Yeah.
Right? Faith is not something that you hear somebody talk about and now all of a sudden you're trying to project some moralism onto other people. Faith is a deeply personal thing. I come from the Christian background, and so every one of us has our own version of our own faith. And there's a lot of people that don't think for themselves in the heritage that I have. And so I try to encourage people to think for themselves. The simplest way to look at faith is the spiritual walk is turning the material into the sacred. So it's treating life as sacred. It's treating relationships as sacred. It's treating your work, for those of us who are spiritual entrepreneurs, as sacred. And so if you are treating your life, your family, your relationships, your work, if you're treating it as sacred, you're truly walking in faith. And there's not very many people out there that live a sacred life. There's a lot of people that pay lip service to it, will quote you the Bible and try to tell you how to live, but behind the scenes, they're not truly living a sacred life. And to me, faith is about living a sacred life.
Excellent. I don't really know how to follow up with that. Um, I it kind of leads me to you started Altar Call.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to jump in it so soon, but it seems like it's a pretty big thing to you. Could you kind of explain it to me? Because I tried understanding it, but I honestly don't pay much attention to social media.
Yeah.
Trying to start all this and stuff. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give you a backstory. So I had pursued entrepreneurship in a very secular way, a very egotistical way. I wanted cars and I wanted a rock star lifestyle and mansions all over the Hollywood Hills and a private jet and a lot of the things that you see many rock star entrepreneurs doing and touting was the life that I lived. And then my mom passed away, and all of that rock star decadent living surfaced in front of me. And I realized that I'd give it all back to have another minute with her, and that I had time. I could have had time with my mom that I invested unwisely. And I was really mad at myself. I was mad that I lied to her and told her I couldn't be there when I could have. And I had regret when she passed away. And I made a decision that I was going to change the way I lived. And I was going to honor my mom. And I was going to make her proud in the afterlife, so to speak. Like, I was going to do my best to make her proud. And I resigned from boards. I sold off my investments in a number of different investments. I quit responding to emails and text messages. I went to zero and said, okay, God, how can you use me to be of service in humanity? And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was blessed to be able to take a couple of years off and not work at all. And I started on a deep healing journey, healing trauma and healing a lot of mud that I had inherited by way of my upbringing and by way of culture and by way of my own, stupid decisions. And I made a decision that I was going to change some things about me and that I would just re-enter the world as a servant. And I didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. I lost a lot of sleep at night, not knowing, because the prior version of me knew exactly what he's going to do at all times to go make a bunch of money. And I knew why I wanted to be a New York Times bestseller and why I wanted this jet and why I wanted this and why I wanted that. And then also now I have no clue. And so that turned me deeply into my faith, and it turned me just to obedience, which I just started doing what showed up in my life. And two young individuals, two brothers showed up. They were suffering with drug addiction. They were immigrants. They couldn't speak hardly any English. I couldn't understand one of them because he was partially deaf. So it was hard. And I said, all right, God, you want me to mentor these two kids? I will. Started mentoring these two kids. Then I started mentoring a couple other people, then a couple other people. And now in 3 years after starting Altar Call, I got about 100,000 people that I've mentored.
Oh, wow. Wow. So that's so it basically it's a mentoring program.
It's a mentoring organization. We teach people spiritual entrepreneurship, which is basically, if you just think about it, it's sacred entrepreneurship, meaning we teach people how to treat their businesses and their people as sacred, so their people treat their businesses and their customers as sacred too. And that's it. It's a real simple system that we've developed, and we take people through building and scaling and overcoming limiting beliefs and identity-related challenges and healing trauma. We take them through everything that I've had to go through myself to be able to build an organization in 3 years' time that has made the impact that Altar Call has. And the first 3 years is very foundation building. The impact that we'll make, 5-10 years from now, it'll be an order of magnitude greater than what we've done already. And we've already done quite a lot.
I'd never heard of the term before, but a for-profit philanthropy.
Yeah.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit, because it really, really intrigued me.
Well, and I'm on the board of some nonprofits, and I give to nonprofits. Nonprofits have a very important role in society, but they also have some hindrances to them in their structure that prohibit them from fully maximizing their ability to attract and recruit talent. Only a for-profit can attract and recruit the very best of the best talent at scale. There are some nonprofits that have figured out how to crack that code, but it's taken them quite some time. Some political campaigns have cracked that code because they're offering positions of power and things of that nature. But in general, you can only attract and recruit the very best talented people in the world with a for-profit mechanism. And in nonprofits, you can't pay nonprofit people significant wages, and talented people require significant wages. So there's really only one way to build a business that maximizes impact, and that's using a for-profit structure. I mean, when you think about it, the difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is actually kind of ridiculous. It's an IRS designation. Both of them are just a group of people gathered together to get some stuff done. One has got these rules and regulations according to the IRS that prohibit them from paying certain people, and there's regulatory bodies that will measure their effectiveness and their use of cash, and there's a lot of scrutiny on the nonprofit model that tries to make sure that donor dollars are going in a certain direction. And as a donor to nonprofits, I understand that. And in the for-profit model, you have a tremendous amount of ability to create and structure compensation and systems and utilize capital models and raise money and build technology and do things in the for-profit model that you just can't do in the nonprofit model.
Excellent. Around here, we have a lot of nonprofits, but it's usually like local churches, that kind of stuff. We hear major nonprofits, but one of the problems is like, who do you, some of them, it's so saturated. And it seems it's actually kind of difficult to become a nonprofit because you have to go through a lot of steps. And I just didn't see the benefit of it. Like with my company, I'm planning on, giving a percentage of away, because something that's hit my heart really heavy is the world slave trade. You don't hear about it. You hear about sex trafficking, but you don't hear about the actual world slave trade. And I'm like, nobody talks about this. And then I heard about your for-profit. I'm like, well, that makes sense, because I don't want to be a nonprofit because I'm kind of limited on what I can do. Yeah.
Well, and you always got to be begging people for money as a nonprofit, right? And like, I'd rather create value and create products and create systems and structure and not have to have my hand out asking people for money all day long.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue. Some people are good at that. I mean, I didn't become a Christian until 2017, so I didn't know much about churches or anything. And then after becoming a Christian, I realized I'm not really much like a lot of Christians. And I hate the idea of asking people for money. It just seems to me, I think of Trailer Park Joe that lived right next to me that was always asking the bum $20. It feels like there's something gross about it, even though I know.
Yeah, well, there is a skill set to it. I mentored a few successful nonprofit, people that managing directors and so forth, and you can do it well, and many have demonstrated that, and I just believe that the for-profit model is far more conducive, certainly to an entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial creativity. And that's my background. I'm an entrepreneur. So you can't take me as an entrepreneur and then tie my hands behind my back and tell me to go do, I need to be able to utilize every tool at my disposal as an entrepreneur to create the value that I'm here to create.
Using your skill set and stuff, and it kind of circles back to your upbringing and everything. Do you think the fact that you went through that life of, being in a gang, being around drugs and stuff, that actually benefited? Because a lot of people, I remember reading this book. It was David and Goliath. I believe that's the book it was called. But he was talking to some people, and he said that, did you become successful because of or in spite of, and do you think your success in what you're doing is in spite of the fact that you lived like you did and grew up, or was it because you'd gone through such troubles and, in the gang lifestyle that actually you used the tools that you learned?
Yeah, it's because everything in life is happened for you, not to you. Even the stuff that most people would cringe, they knew about what I have witnessed and experienced and what I've gone through. But that stuff that I've gone through has created a tremendous amount of strength within me, courage, fearlessness that other people have. I'm not afraid of things that keep a lot of people up at night, and it's a result of the fact that I got my 10,000 hours, to use a David and Goliath term, in risk taking in before I started as an entrepreneur. So I'd already taken 10,000 hours worth of risk, and in entrepreneurial risk, illegal entrepreneurial risk, and the risks of illegal entrepreneurship are far greater than the risks of legal entrepreneurship. I was worried about, as an illegal entrepreneur, getting killed, getting thrown in jail, having people rat me out, tell on me. I mean, I had all kinds of risk that I had to mitigate as an illegal entrepreneur. And when I showed up to legal entrepreneurship, I was like, this is easy. Like, I'm not worried about going to prison. I'm not worried about having people turn on me. I'm not worried about a drive-by shooting in my house. I'm not worried about all of these things that I had to worry about as an illegal entrepreneur.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reiterating everything in my head.
I love it. Yeah.
I pause a lot when I think, and I'm trying to learn not to pause so much.
You're doing great, man. I'm happy to be on the show with you, and your questions are insightful, and I think they're great.
Well, I appreciate it. I do jump around a lot, and I know I do, but it keeps it interesting. I go through a jungle when you're having a conversation. I was thinking there were similarities about a lot of people have lived in house with domestic violence and with drug. And since it's in your book, I assume that it's open for discussion.
Yeah. Oh
yeah. Your mother, I remember your principal blaming your mother.
Yeah.
For you having the situation you were in, which was very impactful because, at one side you're like, well, you can't really blame it's almost victim blaming.
Yeah.
But, I understand, in my situation, that a lot of times I'm writing a book, and the first chapter is called Apathy and Evil. And I believe apathy is a lot of times bigger and stronger than evil is. How are you able, and this isn't a business related question, how are you able to maintain, a relationship with your mother? And how was she? I mean, because it looks like she turned her attitude around after that.
Yeah. Well, do you think it opened her eyes? Yeah, she had no choice. So it was really tough. My family situation was so bad, and it got so bad, and my living conditions got so bad. I had to flee my father. He threatened to murder me. And he was serious about it too. And he had guns, and there was a chance that I was going to be murdered. Yeah. So I had to flee. And I fled to a neighboring town, and I lived in a shack. And it was a tool shed that was converted. I had carpet up all over the walls and ceilings for insulation. There were rats all in it. I got lice every single day. I go in, they check your hair at those days, and they pull me out of class, and everybody would laugh because, Ryan Blair had lice, basically. That was what I was known for. And then so finally I couldn't get rid of it after, doing that comb thing and the shampoo for it 100 times. So I just shaved my head. And then at that time, it wasn't very popular to shave your head. This was pre-Michael Jordan's, shaved head era. And so they then made fun of me nonstop. Ryan Blair has no hair. Ryan Blair has no hair. And I got sick and tired. I was living in a shed. I had to flee my father. I wasn't living with my mother anymore. And I blew it up. I said, all right, I'm going to go tell this principal the truth is my grades were, failing. Everything in life was bad. And I said, here's what I'm going through. I got a father that's threatening to kill me, a mother who's an alcoholic. I'm living in a shed right now, And the principal, I'll never forget the look on her face. Because when you're a kid, you don't realize how bad it is until you have an adult go, this is bad. Yeah. I'm just surviving at 13 years old in 8th grade, trying to figure out how to survive. Like, I don't realize how bad it is and how abnormal these conditions are, because I was raised in this, violent household. And then my mom got called in, and she was told, he either goes to foster care or you leave your husband. And my mom had no choice. She had an ultimatum. And so she chose me, thank God, begrudgingly. And that was really hard. And it strained our relationship for some period of time. And then, for the next several years, I had to witness my mom in poverty, struggling, working minimum wage, no support from my father. And then I was in a gang-infested environment, getting caught up with the wrong crowd, doing things that were going to send me to prison. And she knew that. And so she was in misery. And, we had a very difficult time in poverty until I was about 17 years old. So from about, 13 to 17, I was on a totally different journey. And then at 17, by the grace of God, a mentor came in my life and I went on another path.
So I think that speaks a lot for your mother.
Yeah.
A lot of people that have never grown up around that don't understand that it's not an easy decision. They think, oh, well, it should be easier for your kid, obviously. But there's a lot of fear when you're living in a domestic situation when you have no other hope.
She was brave. She, one day when my dad was at work, she went and picked me up from the neighboring town in the shack. We went into my dad's house, took all of her stuff and moved, and we got 2 truckloads because we had enough time to go to the neighboring town, which is about a 45-minute drive, then back, then to the neighboring town, then back. Then when we went back with the last truckload, the vagrants at the park that saw us moving had already stole everything we'd moved in. And the mistake that I had made was we moved the most precious stuff first, because we weren't sure if my dad was going to be home on the last, tranche, that we'd have to bail and abort that mission. So we moved the good stuff first, and that's the stuff they took out of the house. So on the very first day that my mom and I moved in together, we were robbed, and they took all my childhood possessions. Everything I owned was gone on that first day. And I'll never forget it. The cop, we called the police. We didn't know any better. The cop says, "You don't want to report this." And I was like, "What do you mean? We just got robbed." And I was like, "Those guys at the park did it." And he's like, "You don't want to report this. They'll come after you if you report this." And so that's when I got a lesson on the neighborhood that I was living in. And I remember just feeling bad, and I had no money, no food. My mom was crying. All of our stuff was gone. And the cop felt so bad, he gave us $20.
Yeah.
And that was our dinner that night.
Wow.
Yeah.
That initial move, the learning lesson. And the fact is that even though that happened, I mean, y'all still survived. Y'all still okay. And better than okay.
I had to go to thrift stores late at night. I would go hunting in the back of thrift stores for the stuff that they'd toss out or the donations, because at the one that I would go to in particular, people would just show up to the back of it and throw all their stuff off the truck. And then they would process it and then inventory it. And so I tried to get to it before they inventoried it to see if I could find clothes to wear, shoes to wear, things like that. And that was my life.
Wow. This was in California, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's here in the South, and we're, some people confuse us from Midwest, but I'm in Southern Oklahoma. We're the South. It's a little different. And coming from a law enforcement background, I've seen cops that just refuse to do their job. They say, "Don't report this," because they're lazy.
Yeah.
But to be honest, that took a certain a lot of people don't think ahead like that.
Yeah.
And he's right. I mean, that would have got you killed.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a few angels that were sent my way. One of them was a police officer who I'm now friends with, I should say. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I've seen the worst of law enforcement in that environment, and I've seen the best of it. And I was fortunate enough to have, one particular officer that made it his life's mission to try to stop me from going too far. And, his name was Sergeant Randy Pennis. He's an undercover, and he would hunt me down and try to find me. And he arrested me a couple of times. And, and finally I got to realizing and then, now I credit him with saving my life, because had he not been there a couple of times to intercept me, I might have done something that, cost my life or someone else's.
Yeah. I have a saying. I actually learned this from a sergeant that I did not like. He was my supervisor, but he said something to a drug dealer that I took to heart. And he said, we don't win because you go to jail. We win because you stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was tough. And I was his antagonist. Like he wanted me, and I was doing all kinds of crime that he knew I was up to, but he couldn't pin it on me.
Yeah.
And so we had this great relationship, and I'm very grateful that he caught me enough times to scare me straight. And there was a time when I went to juvenile hall and I was in solitary confinement because I was a fighter, and I was a minority in the juvenile hall out here, which is primarily filled with, gang members, from African American and Hispanic heritage. And so, it was a tough run to be in there for 30 days. And I was in solitary confinement, reading the Bible, praying to God, just saying like, I do not want to spend the rest of my life with these people. I wanted to get out of this juvenile hall. I did not want to become a professional criminal. And I knew that I was one step away from that. And that's, part of the reason why I believe, by the grace of God, I was sent a mentor, was because of some deep prayer and some commitments that I made in that jail cell.
Yeah. I appreciate that a lot. That when I became a Christian, it was funny. A buddy of mine would always quote the Bible of what I said, and I'd never read the Bible. I never read it until about 6 months ago. But I still say that a lot, especially around here, I see a lot of people having more of a relationship with the Bible than actually God. But there is a huge difference. I mean, the Bible's a tool. But when you have that relationship, and from what I gather, your mother is what actually taught you or gave you the thought process of a relationship with God. Am I wrong?
Yeah, my grandmother was the beginning of it. My mother was very spiritual as well. But, I'll tell you a perspective that I have on this subject, because I'm not the most versed person in the Bible at all. But I am a devoted person to my faith and my spirituality, and I practice it many, many times a day. I probably pray 100 times a day, or it feels like that anyways. What I have learned is there's two elements. There's experiencing spirituality, and then there's understanding spirituality. And the Bible will help you understand it, but you need to have the experiential component. And you have to do both. You have to experience it and then understand it. And a lot of people get mistaken because they just seek an understanding. They just seek the mental aspects of it as opposed to the experiential aspects of it. And, when you combine both experiencing the Holy Spirit, experiencing spirituality with understanding of it is when, you have the best of both worlds. But there are some people that are skewed purely in the understanding and not in the experiencing. The life that they live is not a very spiritual one at all. In fact, it doesn't model Jesus whatsoever. They can quote the Bible all they want, but they're very far away from the way Jesus lived his life.
Yeah, I use the example. I'm like, why do you think Jesus fought the Pharisees so much? And a lot of people get really religious that are like, well, they didn't accept Jesus. I was like, no, they didn't. He didn't even say who he was for the first 2 years. I said, it's because they had no love in their heart.
Yeah.
And somebody had actually kept on tagging me in posts and stuff. He was older than me. He's like 52, something like that. He's about 10 years older than me. And he finally calls me, and he grew up in the church around the Bible. And he said, would you mind being a part of this conversation? Because my friend says it's their Christian obligation to make their children wear masks. And, we were opposed to it. And he said, I don't know anybody that knows the Bible better than you. And at this time, I had never even read the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, I think you're misunderstanding us. Like, it's not that I have a great knowledge of the Bible. I have a great understanding of God.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people, you're right. A lot of people kind of lack that understanding because they're so indoctrinated to learning the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an important, very important aspect of the walk. But there are other things that we also need to do. We need to cleanse our vessel. We need to detox ourselves. We need to remove impurities. purification of yourself is more important to be aligned with God than reading.
Yeah.
Right? To be aligned with God, we have to be pure. And in order for us to be truly aligned with God, we have to be in the fruits of the Spirit and bearing the fruits of the Spirit. And so, that's love, that's joy, that's kindness, that's goodness, that's faithfulness, that's gentleness, that's self-control. I don't know if I said faithfulness. I think I got 9 of them. There's more even that, but the real walk is to be so one with the fruits that you accept anyone of any faith into your home, and you're willing to serve anyone. You're willing to, dedicate your life and devote your life with obedience, and with and with the strategy of discernment to be able to, do God's work as He calls you to. There's a whole lot of people out there that claim to be faithful that are not willing to actually, exercise their faith with obedience.
Yeah, they and I think and I'm going to give credit that you may or may not give credit to your discernment. I think growing up the way you did has taught you to discern things. And when I read about Jesus, that's actually when I became a real Christian. Somebody who I look at him and I'm like, I thought Jesus was an effeminate pacifist, and I come Southern, that if you're not afraid to get punched in the face, then you're not somebody worth following. Yeah. And so I'm like, but when I read about him, everybody's like, yeah, he would whip, he went to the temple. Everybody talks about that. I'm like, that's not what made him a badass. Yeah. It's the fact that he would look at a centurion in the eye. I mean, he did stuff like that, just some small things that said no. But he also, what I noticed is that what you were saying, and it hit hard, is that he did not judge other people's faith. He didn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
He never mentioned it. He talked about the Pharisees, but that was his own faith. I mean, obviously he's going to talk about the Jews because he is a Jew. Yeah. But that's what I appreciate when I've noticed you, is that I've never heard you say anything bad about somebody's faith, and you're not boisterous necessarily about your own faith. You're just walking who you are, and you are your faith. That's what a disciple is. It's somebody who not going around punching people in the face with the Bible. It's just that they're preaching love. They're spreading.
Yeah. Sure. Well, so there's 3 elements to this. You have to model, you have to teach, and you have to preach.
Yeah.
And most people forget the modeling part. Right? They're good at teaching and preaching, but they don't really model Jesus at all. And so I want to model as best as I can. I'm nowhere near it, but I want to do my best to model pure love, which is Jesus, right? And the more that I do the intrapersonal work to embody the fruits of the Spirit, and the more that God cultivates my character and my competency to bear those fruits of the Spirit, the more that I am modeling, teaching, and preaching. And I do that, but I want people to ask me how I'm able to bear those fruits of the Spirit. And I want to bait them into a conversation by way of the model that I'm operating from, not by trying to push it down their throat. I believe in the old adage of show, not tell. Yeah. Right. So, I don't go running around telling everybody everything that makes up my faith. I show them. And if they're interested in learning more, then I invite them into a conversation where, we can have some teaching and some preaching on the subject. Nice.
But to me, that's more natural anyway.
Yeah.
When I've been around here, I get a lot of people talking about Romans 12 says you're not supposed to be of the world, and you're supposed to be like separate and do everything separate from everybody, which makes it really difficult to even talk to anybody when you automatically put yourself separate from them. And then Paul in Corinthians, and don't ask me how I remember all this stuff. I don't know. 1 Corinthians 9, 22 through 24, he said, I became weak to win the weak. I became all things, all men, so I can win a few. Yeah. Which is literally talking about adapting, because when I was an interrogator in law enforcement, that's what I loved doing. I loved learning how to talk to people because I really sucked at it. And what I'd found is, and what I see what you do is you relate when you're talking to them, and you make them comfortable, because you can't sell anything unless they feel like you're part of the same team they're on. You're going for the same goal.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah. I have a genuine love for every human being I was on the beach in Los Angeles, and we have a pretty tough homeless problem here. And I was walking around for a couple of hours just yesterday. And I was just looking at people just like, I love this person. And there's people that are dealing with mental health challenges, addiction, and a variety of different, serious, situations going on. And I was just sending everyone I could a smile and love as much as I possibly could. And I think that's what, and I wasn't always this way by any means. This has been an evolution that I have to give all the credit to the Creator on. But when you're really called to walk the Christian walk, we should be sending people as much love as we possibly can, regardless of their faith, regardless of their conditions, regardless of their economic status. The secular movement is designed to try to separate. And we have to do the opposite. We have to unify. And so the mission of a good Christian, in my opinion, is to unify people, not to separate, and I think the modern church is making a big mistake in trying to separate, saying, oh, we're Christian. We're not going to, invite these people into our home. It's like, no, we're Christian. It is our duty to invite these people into our home.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I'll say I had a spiritual awakening about a year and a half ago. I became a Christian in 2017. I say that because I started going to church. And I didn't really have a great affection for Christians because most of them, like you said, it was about separation. I call it, they use the Bible as a weapon of mass division. And instead of preaching love. And I realized suddenly I was loving people that I thought I was supposed to hate, like Muslims. I'm like, well, they're so evil. They do this and they do that. I'm like, well, if I grew up in Islam, I'd probably feel the same way they do.
Yeah.
And I realized that's what Jesus did. He taught everything with love, and it wasn't about judging somebody and stuff. He just showed them love, and that's the best way to disciple.
Yeah.
Is by
if you look for
love.
what separates you, we're going to find it. If you and I just sat here and said all the things that separate us, we could spend all day long on that, right? So we got to look for what unites us. And that's the message that I'm here to bring to the world. Every faith that I have studied, and I've studied Hinduism, Buddhism, the Quran, Christianity, Kabbalah, Judaism, I've studied a bunch of them. And there are a number of common values that we all share. One is love. Two is forgiveness. Every faith has a mandate around love, and none of them are perfect, not ours included. There's plenty of stuff you can find in the Bible that doesn't feel very loving. But there's a mandate around love. There's a mandate around forgiveness. There's a mandate around humility in all of them, right? And so we should be humble. And there's a mandate around compassion. So if we just look for what aligns us and we say, okay, each of these faiths have these components: love, honesty, forgiveness, compassion, right? Humility. Like we can agree, love, honesty, forgiveness, compassion, humility. These 5 values, if we're showing up together and we agree to these 5 values and we're going to honor these 5 values in our relationship, we're going to get along just fine, right? Love, compassion, honesty, humility, and forgiveness.
Yeah. Every
relationship built on those 5 values is going to be a great relationship.
I 100% agree. I try to explain that a lot. It's amazing. And of course, I live in the Bible Belt, so I'm surrounded by
I know
people.
When you say Southern Oklahoma, what town are you from?
I'm from Shakota, Oklahoma. Sort of. I moved there in high school. I lived in like maybe 20 different towns before I turned 12.
My son's half of my son's family. My son's mother is from Bremen, Oklahoma. And so that's on the Kansas border. It's on the 2-mile marker on the Kansas border. And I've been to Ponca and Enid, and I've spent a lot of time in Oklahoma.
Okay. Yeah. We have a lot of people from California moving here. I live in Tulsa now. I call Tulsa home. And we get a lot of people.
Tulsa a few times.
It's different because I went to me and my wife, when we got married in 2015, we actually stayed in Palm Springs and we traveled. We went to LA, San Diego, Oceanside, and saw a different world, which was not what we thought it was. I mean, it was actually really pretty. I mean, we liked it. Not for me. I thought I wear cowboy boots everywhere I go. So I'm like, well, I might get some stares. Nobody cared. I was like, I don't really talk like everybody else. I was like, when I was in Wyoming, I was a cop over there, and you would think Wyoming, they think like Lone Star or Lonesome, or what's that show on that? Well, there's a bunch of television shows about in Wyoming. Everybody thinks they have a thick country accent. They do not. Yeah. And when I was up there, people were like, why do you talk so slow? Are you stupid? And I said, no, it's so people like you can understand us. Yeah. But our sarcasm and our wit is what gets us by, because a lot of people think we're dumb. Some of us are, but
you find that everywhere.
Yeah, we like to live slower for a reason, and a lot of people, when they come from California, there's about a 3-year what's that word?
Acclimation process. Yeah.
Where
we have a cabin and we have a retreat center we're building in northern Arizona, and it's off the grid. It's at 6,000 feet elevation. And I'm an introvert by nature. So I love getting off the grid and going out there and being in the outdoors. So I get it. I'm in the city, but I'm not of the city.
Yeah. No, to me, the city is a tool. The only reason I'm here is because it's the best way to make money for right now. But the reason why I'm starting my companies is for 2 reasons. So I can, my whole life's purpose is to make the world a better place, to raise people's vibration. And then the other part is so I can work anywhere I want to, so I can live out in the middle of the woods. Yeah. I don't,
I just got my dream place, 80 acres. We have 6 cabins on the property, and I go out there, and now with Starlink internet, I can get access to the internet if I need it, and I'm in heaven.
Nice.
I'm 12 miles on a dirt road, no electricity, no, everything is well-driven water. I'm off the grid completely.
Yeah, it's one of them areas. If you hear a vehicle, you grab your gun.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm at too. Yeah. If there's a car coming by, it's an issue.
Yeah. They're like, oh, them poachers. But I really enjoyed talking to you, because I follow a lot of people, and to be honest, I'm naturally introverted. I'm very, very introverted. I'm very social. And speaking of that, I really wanted to get this in why you have now. Something that really fascinated me is your son was diagnosed with autism, right? Yeah. I know I got real serious real quick, but it's actually not serious, because not serious as in a somber serious. What I found amazing was that, I was diagnosed with Asperger's in my early 20s. And to me, I was glad I found out at that age instead of younger, because most people, it becomes a crutch. And to me, it was something that it taught me what I needed to overcome. It's fascinating, because I don't see hardly anybody that was ever diagnosed with autism that able to become what people think is normal, quote unquote. Yeah. What did y'all do differently?
A lot of prayer. There was a moment where I took my son through a baptism, and when he came out of the water, I saw his eyes had changed. Yeah. And I felt in that moment that he was free from autism. So I have to give all the credit to God. A lot of love, a lot of prayer. And, he now displays 0 autistic traits whatsoever. We have a long road ahead of us in that the first 9 years of his life, he didn't get to do much learning. Not learning in the traditional sense, in that, the school conditions that he was in, he couldn't learn. He had to have a behavioral interventionist at all times with him, to redirect his behavior, because he couldn't sit still, sit in class, couldn't follow along in anything. And after this baptism, I saw a change in him, and he took off. Now he's growing and thriving, and I got to give all the credit to God and to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, because it was a Jesus moment where he was healed.
Nice. Did y'all ever feel the need to, I hate using the word coddle, but a lot of people will adapt him or adapt the world to him? Did y'all?
Yeah.
Because you don't seem like that type of person. And did that have any kind of role in anything?
Well, you have to adapt so as parents, our job, these children don't belong to us. We don't own them. Yeah. We're growing up just as they're growing up, right? So our job is to try to equip them with values and wisdom and love so that they can thrive and do what their souls come here to do and follow their own individual calling, not necessarily the one that I have planned for them. Or, so my parental method is my son's going to learn the lessons that he needs to learn one way or the other. And I'm just there to hold his hand during the process. And I'm not going to try to prevent him from learning what he needs to learn. And that might include some suffering, right? Because suffering is an important teacher on all of our journeys. So, I'm not one of these parents that's trying to shape my son. I know God's going to shape his character. I'm just teaching him how to have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And trying to transfer on to him the lessons and the wisdom that I've learned along the way. And, but I adapt to him, and that, I see my role as, he came here with a unique calling on his heart. My role is to help him find that calling. And then once he does, obviously he doesn't know it yet. He's only 13 years old. Once he does, is to, put everything I can behind it.
Yeah.
And until then, let him experiment, let him discover himself, and, just try to keep him from hurting himself or others in the process.
That's excellent. I mean, it's going to sound weird coming from me because you don't know me from Adam or anything, but I gain a lot of pride about who you are based on the way you reacted towards other people and your child, because, I didn't grow up with a father, didn't meet him until I was 20. And, and I realized most people that grew up like that without a father end up being horrible fathers. And it was just an excuse. And I seen, not only did you come up with that as a hitch, you had a child that, you're raising by yourself pretty much, right?
Well, no, I got a lot of help. My son's mother we're not together. So both of us have our own responsibility to raise him, and we split it about 50% of the time. So, but she's an amazing mother and amazing help to him by all means. So I can't take credit for this alone by any means, but I do take 100% of the credit for being the father in his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she does a good job of being the mother. But on that, I will tell you that my dad taught me what not to do. Yeah. And he's no longer with us. I'm so grateful to have had a father that told me exactly what not to do, because sometimes that's more important than what to do, right? Yeah. What not to do, when you got a long list of what not to do, then you know exactly what to do.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's what taught me forgiveness. I didn't understand forgiveness, because when you start getting into church, they want to preach a lot about forgiveness. And they're like, you need to forgive because God forgave you. I'm like, to me, that was a BS reason. I'm like, I don't even understand that. But when I understood that, well, it was all the troubles and the sacrifices and the pains, the suffering that I went through that taught me so much. And that was invaluable. That's why, somebody asked earlier, if you tell yourself, your younger self, one thing, what would it be and how would it change your life? And I'd say, own it, because I didn't own who I was and what I was going through. I ignored everything. But it's accepting that, they might've been a POS at the time. They might've seemed like they hurt you, but that pain taught you a lot of things. You wouldn't want it to do that to anybody else on purpose, but that's awesome that you can actually take your pain again and turn it into something. I said I'd respect your time, and it's been. But
I do want to touch on that, because I think what you just said is profound. Forgiveness is something that we have to constantly develop within us, and as we grow and as our level of awareness grows, so does our understanding of forgiveness. It's not just a one-time thing. You gotta keep I gotta keep doing the forgiveness work. Every time something happens, my dad passed away. I spent 90 days, and I hadn't seen him since I was 13. But upon his transition, I spent 90 days doing forgiveness work on my relationship with him so that I could heal what had happened between us. And now I have a lot more love for him than I ever have. Like I see the good times, and I tend to hold and focus on those and not the bad times. Yeah. And I'm actually grateful for the bad times, because I would not be the father that I am today if it were not for them. And my dad's no longer with us, and I often laugh that, he can help me from the other side now. He couldn't help me in this life, because I use the analogy that my dad was old code. He was Windows 1945, right? I'm Windows 1977. My son is Windows 2009. Like, I look at my old Windows PC that's in the garage. I'm not mad at it for not having a fast processor. I'm not mad at it because it couldn't, do the work that I needed to. I use that computer, for the time that it was in my life, and I got a lot out of it. And I'm grateful to that computer. Our parents are they're old code. We're supposed to extract the best out of them and leave the worst behind. And just as I'm supposed to do that with my son's supposed to do that with me. I hope that he says, Dad, you're old code, and I'm not taking this dysfunctional code base with me. I'm only taking the good stuff with me. That's the hope for all of us. So when you have a really bad parent, it's just really easy to see the bad code and just extract the good code from it.
Yeah. A lot of people want to, they want to blame. They want to become victims of everything. Yeah. And I'm a big believer in, you're only a victim because you allowed yourself to be. I mean, I compare everything to working out, lifting weights and stuff like that. And I've had six different surgeries that put me out. And, and every time I went back to the gym and started the painful and everything, but I knew the outcome. Yeah. Or at least I knew the goal I wanted to achieve, but I always had to go through that pain. Well, that's the same thing in life. What would happen if we lived in heaven? And because I don't ever hear anybody asking what the meaning of life is in the Christian world. For some reason, they just don't talk about it. But I'm like, well, if we all lived in heaven and everything's perfect, how would we grow? Yeah. We need the troubles. We need the suffering to grow. And, I truly believe there's no such thing as a bad experience. Now, if you take your ego out, it may feel bad. It may seem horrible, but it's a blink of the eye. It's not bad, because everything will either teach you something or put you in the place that you need to be. Everything, as much as you hate it still does.
But, one thing that we live in a culture that recognizes, and rightfully so, victims. The one thing that unifies most of every human being in humanity is the support and the protection of a victim. And we need that. If a child's being victimized in almost any country, the common people are going to step up, right? And that's not every country, but in most of them. We all want to protect the victim. And I was a victim, but it's a past tense thing. I no longer am one. You have to heal and forgive those who have victimized you. If you don't, you will become a perpetrator. Yeah. Because every perpetrator once was a victim. So the only chance that you have is to heal that victimization that occurred, so that you can go on and live life without having to have anger in you or without the ramifications. Because when a person victimizes you, it's like they've put a curse on you. Yeah. And unless you learn to lift that curse through forgiveness, you'll forever bear that curse. And so, and also our society will reward a person that walks around with, the victim badge. Yeah. And, I'm here to tell you that you got to heal that. It might take some time. It might take years, depending on how bad it was. But you got to heal that so that you no longer identify as a victim and feel as though you were a victim. And the only way to do that is through forgiveness.
Excellent. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, you're a victim at the time of it, but what you do afterwards is whether
it can take time. It could take, you had years worth of abuse. It could take years worth of time to solve that. So I have deep empathy for people who have been victimized, and I'm not making light of it. Yeah. I felt victimized for quite some period of time. And then when my dad passed away, I said to myself, like, I'm gonna do the healing work that I have been putting off. Now that he's no longer here, I can, I don't have anything to worry about. I'm never going to see him again in the flesh. One day I'll see him spiritually, and I plan to be completely healed for that day to come.
Yeah. Excellent. Some pretty wise words. A lot of people don't understand the importance of forgiveness in everything.
Yes,
I mean, I think it's one of the most important things you can do. Ryan, I really, really do appreciate you coming on. What's a good way that if people wanted to find out more about you, more about Altar Call, would they be able to get a hold of you and reach what you're doing?
Yeah, you just go to altarcall.com. It's ALTERCALL.com, or you can catch me on Instagram. I'm at Real Ryan Blair.
Thank you for sticking around till the end. Hopefully, I left you either enlightened, lightened, or moved by the experience. If you enjoyed what you saw, could you hit that like and subscribe button right there? And if you didn't, could you still hit that like and subscribe button right there so somebody else has the opportunity to not like what they saw? Thank you.